Monitoring Active Directory. Okay, in this nugget, we're talking about monitoring Active Directory, and that's the way the exam objective reads, but in reality, it's more than just monitoring Active Directory. It's monitoring a lot of things relating to memory resources, or relating to CPU utilization, disk utilization, all different other kinds of things there that Microsoft kind of lumps all together into Active Directory, but it's not really just Active Directory specific. Now, here I'm not going to do the normal intro whiteboard where I tick off each one of these items and then start teaching. Really, I'm going to use this as the teaching whiteboard because really they're all kind of self-contained topics that I can just mark off one at a time and discuss with you. And the first one that we want to look at here is something called Task Manager. And Task Manager can be easily accessed using a number of different methods. You could just type TASKMGR from a start search, TASKMGR, for example, and that would, of course, take you to taskmanager.exe. I could just actually press enter now or click up here. Either one works. And this would bring up Task Manager as you see it right here. The other thing I could do, and this is another way that you can do this, is to right-click on the taskbar and choose Task Manager, and then you can also do a Control-Alt-Delete. When you do that, there will be also an option for Task Manager. The method that I prefer to do this with is to just hold down on the keyboard Control-Shift-Escape, and bam, there it appears right away. It's a very quick and easy way to get to it. Now, what's the advantage of this? What you can do is to, for example, kill applications that are giving you a problem. Let's just say, for example, I'm going to start something real simple here, just Notepad. But let's say that this was any other word processing program and it had problems with some kind of a font, incompatible font or something like that, or it was causing other lockup problems. Well, I can just right-click on this thing in Task Manager and choose End Task. That can be very useful because sometimes a task, even when you click on the X over in here in the right-hand corner, it doesn't seem to do anything. Now, with Vista and 2008, they will give you at times a notification of that, and then you can also send error reports to Microsoft so that if they get an accumulation of the same kind of problem, they can try to address it with whoever the vendor is. But otherwise, if I just want to really kill it just right now, I'll just right-click here, choose End Task, and that's pretty much it. Now, the other thing I could have done, if I go back into, let's just use that again. The other thing I could have done is I might want to just go to the process that is running. I want to see if it's actually trying to do something, but it's just using a lot of resources while doing it. Maybe I look down here. It says that the CPU utilization right now is actually very reasonable. But let's just say that it's pegged at 90 to 100%, and maybe it's draining my physical memory as well. Maybe it's using up 90 or 100% of my physical memory as well. If that's the case, I might want to right-click on this and choose Go to Process and then confirm whether or not it's actually this item that's using up all the CPU and using up all of the memory. And then what we'll see happen there is, if you want to, you can sort these instead of alphabetically, you can sort these by CPU instead. And then what I find kind of weird is, when you choose to sort by CPU or memory, it actually shows you what is using the least at the top first. Well, that's very rarely, if ever, what I'm really interested in. So I usually have to click it again to show the top users up at the top first. Task Manager itself apparently uses quite a bit there. And then you can also, of course, do the same thing with memory again, though it starts with whatever's using the least. So I have to click it again to go to that. And again, here you can see the MMC console that we use for Server Manager. Wow, that uses almost 160 megabytes. So maybe that's part of the reason why it's kind of sluggish sometimes. And then another thing to keep in mind here is, let me go to Notepad here, I'll just alphabetize this again. And another thing to notice about this is that sometimes you can also do other modifications from this Processes tab. For example, maybe it's a little application, I'm not really quite sure what this is. Maybe it's got, something I don't recognize. I can open the file location. For example, if it's coming out of my temporary internet files, that might not be a good thing, because that might be some renegade little web applet that is turned loose on my system that's a worm or some other kind of a malware. So you can open the file location if you want to just confirm that it comes from a trusted location at least. And then you can also choose End Process, which is the same thing that I did on the Applications tab, or End Process Tree. And what is that going to do? What that's very useful to do is sometimes an application will actually use multiple sub-applications, if you will, with it, and especially the larger and more complex ones. So that if I were to just end this one application, it might not help me. It might, one of the other applications that it was using, or other resources that it was using, might still be causing a problem. However, if I right-click and choose End Process Tree, it'll end all of the processes that this one was using. The problem with that is some of those other processes might also be in use by other applications that I actually still want to run. So it's a little bit of a calculated risk sometimes, but if you're desperate and you really just can't get the system to respond properly or something, you might need to do that one. You can also do a number of other things here as well. For example, right now I'm seeing the user for trainer here, but if I had multiple users logged on, I could show processes from all users, which of course requires administrative privilege. And you could certainly do that. The other thing we can do is to go down here to priority and choose set priority to real-time, high, above normal, and so forth. Normally, most applications should run just in normal, and if they follow the Microsoft's Software Development Kit, or SDK, that's where they're supposed to go by default, unless they have special exceptions from Microsoft for different kinds of processes. So they could go a little bit higher. However, if this little application that I'm running really needs more processor time at the expense of other applications that are also running, I could increase this processor time here. On the other hand, if it's being too greedy, I can lower it as well. So for example, if I went to above normal, I could click that. You'll get a little warning message as well when you do that. But it's just saying that it could cause system instability, and I'm going to go ahead and allow that to take place. But the system instability might simply be because of what I just said. It might interfere potentially with other applications that are also running, or with the operating system. But again, might have to be a calculated risk. And then one other thing you could do with this, I almost forgot to mention this one, is the virtualization item. Let me explain what that is. That's not like working with virtual machines or something like that. That's kind of what you would think by looking at the name. This really is another aspect of user account control. Not that thing where you have to click on continue after you click on like a shield item like this. This really has to do with the redirection of file and registry rights to per user locations. You see, by default, the operating system in 2008 and Vista as well will prevent certain rights from taking place to protected portions of the file or operating system. So what you could do is to checkbox this on or off to override that. Okay, that's what that relates to. You can also create a dump file. This is more programmatic in nature, and that would dump out the memory locations that the application was using and so forth. Most of the time, administrators don't have a whole lot of use for that. Then you could, again, like I said, set priority. Here's this one here, set affinity. If you have multiple processors in your system, and most systems now are at least multi-core, then I could tell this process to go to prefer one of the processors or the other. So I could say only run on CPU 0 or only run on CPU 1 or both. By default, unless it's been built into the programming of an application, by default they'll use both anyway. So there's some good things that we can do there with Task Manager for kind of Johnny on the spot monitoring and looking at different things that are going on and manipulating them as such. Sometimes you may also need to identify the exact process that's going on here. To do that, you can go to View, select columns, and choose PID or Process Identifier, as well as some other options that you see here. And then this would identify the unique process ID for each one of the running tasks. Now this will always change. I mean, for example, right now I'm running Notepad, but if I were to close this and open it up some other time, it wouldn't be 3212. In fact, let's just check it out. I'll run this again, and we'll go back to Accessories and Notepad, and we see that now it is 2960. So it's not always locked in at the same, and that's one reason why I need to look up the process ID at times, is because you might need to do something from a command line to manipulate this process. So anyway, also we have here services that we can identify. We don't have a lot of reason for working with this, only because normally we'd work with the services item from within the Server Manager console. If you want to go directly to services in that same console or the services node, then you could go to services here, and with administrative permissions you could go ahead and access that. Here on our performance tab, this is again a good Johnny on the spot look of how our system is running. I can see how much CPU utilization I'm currently using, and if this is relatively high at 70-80% or something like that on a frequent and regular basis, then I might need to add an additional processor, for example. That's all relative, by the way, how much processor CPU usage is acceptable and how much is not. It really all depends upon your own comfort level and the need that you have for performance in a lot of different ways here. But we also have memory down here. This will tell me how much memory I have that's currently in use. And as much as whatever's in use, the probably a more revealing number is how much is free. The less free memory that I have, the more paging that it's going to have to do, and the bigger detriment that I'm going to have to my overall performance, because the hard drive is normally the slowest function within the entire computer. And then another thing I also like in recent operating systems from Microsoft is the networking tab, where it shows you the local area connection here, and it shows you how much of its maximum link speed it's using. And this is very useful to identify whether or not I'm getting the throughput that I might expect on the network. And then finally, over here on the Users tab, you can see that if there are multiple users logged on, that you can disconnect one of those users. This is especially true of remote desktop connections. That's really its main purpose. Or something like a terminal server connection, although there are other tools within terminal server that are more direct and useful than what we're seeing right here. And then you can also forcibly log somebody off as well as send them a message. Of course, I am the locally logged on user here, so I can't send myself a message right at this time. But if there was someone else logged on, for example, through a remote desktop connection or terminal services, then I could send that person a message. Now, as much as I like Task Manager, Resource Monitor is an even better tool for looking at on-the-spot reads of your system performance. Now, neither one of these top tools here will keep track of anything in a permanent way. It doesn't write out to log files or anything like that. But at least it is useful in a real-time look at your performance. So if I go into Task Manager and go to the Performance tab, I can choose Resource Monitor. This is especially useful if I realize, wow, my memory usage is really high, or my CPU utilization is really high. I wonder what's causing it. Well, I could again go to the processes, but I can get even more information out of Resource Monitor by clicking here, or by accessing it from the Start menu. They both work. And then here I can again get a different view of each one of these things. If I click on one of these graphs, then it will show me exactly some details about that one. So for example, if I click on CPU here, notice that it expands it out. I can also use the little arrows over here as well if I want to. And this would then identify which resources were using the most CPU utilization. And to illustrate that, I've opened up something called 32-bit multi-threaded WinBez. This application has got to be close to 14, 15 years old, people. This came out with, I think it was Windows 95 or even before then. But it's just useful for testing. I can just press Control-T a whole bunch of times, and I can see here that its whole purpose in life is to create all of these little Bezier curves that we see going on here. Now, once that's running, now I can see on my CPU utilization, look how that is spiked now. And if I look at whichever one needs the most CPU utilization, we're going to see that indeed it is WinBez, and it's got 26 threads that it's running. In other words, I pressed, in this case, Control-T 26 different times. And I probably actually pressed it like 25 times, and then there's one thread for the actual application itself. I'm going to open that up and then just close it real quick here because I don't want it to interfere with the rest of the recording because it's using a lot of CPU utilization there. But you can also, that's kind of the whole point. I can identify what's using the most resources, and if it's not critical and it's affecting other things, I can kill it. And then I have things like the disk utilization. Of course, for most of the most purposes, your performance is going to be measured and live or die by whatever the disk is doing, because since that's the slowest part of the computer in most cases, that's also going to be the bottleneck. If it's extremely busy, then you're going to have a problem with the performance. So I like to sort this according to read or write megabytes per second. That way I can identify what's using the most disk utilization. And again, if it's not critical, I can stop it, or I can do something else to help change it. And also, if there's a specific file that's being used, it's being read to or read from or written to quite a lot, it'll even tell you which file it is that's causing the issue there. So, very handy utility in that respect as well. Then what else we could do here is take a look at the network utilization and identify what's using the most network resources. If you're trying to maybe download something from an internet website and it seems to be taking longer than it should, maybe you can go in here and find something else that's actually that you forgot about. That's a large file transfer that's going on or something like that between two hosts on your own network. That's why maybe your internet connection seems to be so slow. So these are some basic ideas. Memory as well. We can see what's using the most memory. This is another good one, not for the memory in itself, but when you have something that's using a lot of memory, it's going to force the system to go to the paging file or the swap file, and then again you're going to tick up your hard disk utilization, and that again is going to slow things down. So this is a very, very good tool for just kind of on-the-spot readings of what your system is doing, and I like this quite a lot. A very big improvement. It's also available in Windows Vista, and very good for on-the-spot utilization. Although, again, you cannot do something like a file and save as or something like that. All you can do pretty much is to exit. Okay, now this next thing I'm going to show you about, Network Monitor, is awesome. Now you might be thinking, James, I've used Network Monitor before. Not that good a deal. I mean, it's just kind of okay. Just kind of barely does the job. It's much better to get third-party products like WinPCAP or something else like that that you can download even for free off the internet. Well, guess what? Microsoft's Network Monitor is now version 3.2. It's kind of undergone an overhaul, and although it would be beyond our scope to show you every single thing that's available now within this, I gotta tell you, overall, it is really a pretty nice thing that Microsoft has done here. This is pretty good. What you can do is you can start a new capture. By the way, when you run this for the first time, don't be surprised if it looks like it gives you an error message saying that it has not been able to bind to a network adapter. Here we can see I'm bound to my main network adapter that I have inside my system here. But the first time you run it, it may not. You may have to close it and start it up again. But I'm just going to do a new capture, and then I'm just going to go ahead and click on Start. Now, I'm going to come back to some of this in a moment here, but I'm going to have to start capturing network traffic first. And let's just go ahead and go to a website. I'll go to one of my favorite websites. How about DP Review? This is a website for camera aficionados and photographers and so forth, and so you can get all kinds of cool information about different cameras and things like that on here. Okay, so basically that's all I want to do right now. I open the web page. It downloaded a little bit of traffic. There had to have been a DNS query against it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the traffic that was generated. First of all, one thing I really like about this is it can separate out different conversations. One of the confusing parts about Network Monitor in the past has been it's got really too much information. It's hard to identify and see one packet and how it relates to all the other packets. Is this just some kind of a renegade packet, or is it a response to a query that some other packet had made? So here we can kind of get a better idea for all the things that have been going on here, for example. And you can even identify the process that was used, what port numbers, with the source, the destination, which protocol was in use. And if you want to filter some of this stuff, that's very cool too. What we can do now is I can go ahead and select a filter. And this is how we're going to do that. We're going to go up here to Filter, and we're in the Display Filter tab right now. So I'm going to do Display Filter. I could have also done a Capture Filter, which would have only captured packets of my choosing, and I would have specified a protocol or something like that. But I'm going to go to Display Filter, and there's standard filters. You can also customize them for your own purposes if you want to do that. But I'm going to go to Standard Filters, and let's just say I'm looking for DNS all name queries. Okay, any kind of a DNS function that was taking place there. And then what I can do is to go ahead and apply that filter. And then you can look down here and it says, oops, James, you did something wrong because now you got nothing. No, actually I did that right. The thing that's showing me is there's nothing related to DNS in this conversation. Now, we don't have a lot of room to work with here because of resolution limitations, but let me expand this out as much as I can. You can see over to the right, it says Conversation ID 0. Well, that tells me that that's different named conversations that have been taking place here. But if I scroll on down and if I look for packets that actually have data in them that would appear, then we'll be able to find any data that did have indeed a DNS query in it. So eventually we would be able to find what our display filter calls for. Let's take a look now at another thing that we can use to monitor Active Directory and systems in general, and that is Network Monitor. Now, the first thing you might be thinking is, if you've used Windows in the past, James, I've used Network Monitor before. Not that great. Much better to download WinPCAP or one of those other free utilities you can download from the internet. Well, WinPCAP is really good, and I do recommend it. But I gotta give Microsoft credit. This new version of Network Monitor is so much better than what we've had in the past. This is version 3.2. You do have to download it. This is not something that comes with Windows Server 2008. But just Google on Microsoft's site or just search directly on Microsoft's site, and you should be able to find it. And here what we have is Network Monitor version 3.2 with a totally different look. Gives you some things down here that are new about it. Big thing about it is the parsing. With the parsing, you can search against or filter against a number of different protocols that are very useful in narrowing down your data. And that's the big thing with network monitoring, is that usually you have too much information. I mean, with just a few seconds of packet captures on a network, you can have a sea of information that will take you a long time to sort through. So what we want to do is to make this a little bit easier instead by searching against only what we really want to have or what we really need to have. And I'm going to start here in new capture. When I choose a new capture here, it's really pretty simple. You just click on Start, and then what I'm going to do is to open up a web page. Okay, so I'm going to open up a web page here. Let me just go someplace where I'll be able to look something up. How about Nikon USA, like my favorite site? So I'm going to Nikon USA, and if I just, first of all, I had to have a DNS query to get to Nikon USA because I've typed it into my browser before, but boy, it's been a few days ago, so I doubt if that DNS record is still it needs to be refreshed, basically. So here I'll just go ahead and find out more about this camera that you guys are going to buy me for Christmas. It's this D3. Okay, so here we're going to find out more about this D3X camera that you guys are all going to chip in and buy me for Christmas. Look, it's a little bit more than I thought. It's only $8,000, but hey, I'm sure you guys are up for it. Anyway, so here's this camera. Now, as I close that up, here we see that some things have gone on. I'm going to go ahead and stop the capture. Stop it. Notice that you could have also paused it. But now once I've stopped it, I'm going to go down to here and I'm going to look at some traffic. And maybe I just want to, first of all, look at some interesting information over here. Notice that these are all separated out by conversation IDs. Network Monitor now has a way of grouping together different conversations so that you don't have just a bunch of miscellaneous packets that it's difficult to see a relationship from one to the other. And was this packet in response to another packet that was sent earlier? And is it a response to a query? And, what is this? So that's very good. Another thing that I like about this is, let me go back up here, that you can also, let me give ourselves a little bit more space. We don't have a lot of resolution to work with here, so I'll do the best I can. But I can also set a filter according to this. So if I choose filter up here at the top, and I choose display filter. Now I can do a capture filter, which would only capture whatever my criteria was here. Okay, and you can see I can say I want to know anything relating to, searches by alias or NetBIOS, any of those kinds of things. Or in this case, what I want to do is I've already captured the data, so I just want to load a filter for the display. And it's the same thing. So I can do a load a filter for display, and you can also create your own. But I'm going to do a display filter for all DNS name queries. Let's do that one. Okay, and then once I do that, now notice that it's only filtering here DNS information in all of this section right here. Anything related directly to Internet Explorer, it would have another section for it. So it's a great way to segment out the different things that are going on here. And remember I told you earlier that we have, DNS traffic going on. If we go down here to this frame, remember I said that DNS traffic happens over port 53 at some earlier point. Well, if I go down to this UDP section down here, I can see that the source port was 60,575, but the destination port, I don't know if you can see that, it's in a tooltip, but it kind of scrolls off, is indeed DNS 53. Okay, so just some ideas there on how all this kind of stuff works. This was the source computer that was trying to query, and this is the destination. This must be a DNS server out on the internet somewhere that was able to resolve this IP address for me, or this name to an IP address. Now, for exam purposes, I don't think that you're going to need to know every single little option and checkbox and button and scroll bar and everything that we're seeing here. The main thing to keep in mind is that Microsoft's Network Monitor is the way to capture packets and analyze what you're seeing on your network. And you might need to use this to capture some kind of traffic related to Active Directory. For example, again, it kind of goes back to DNS, because if a client's not able to log on to a domain controller, but they're up and running, very frequently that somehow relates to a DNS issue. So maybe you're finding queries here that are going out but never get answered. Things like that. And you can also save these as well for future reference if you want. But again, Microsoft's new Network Monitor version 3.2, excellent tool. Now here's another tool that I like quite a lot, the Reliability and Performance Monitor. And once again, we've probably always had enough information in past versions of Windows. It's just a matter of distilling it all. Well, the Reliability and Performance Monitor can really help us do that so that we can get some useful information for once out of all of these things that are going on. And I'm just going to access this from Administrative Tools here just to give myself a simpler interface to work with for the time being. Now, of course, this looks familiar. We've seen that before. So some of these tools that we'll see here are actually repeats that we can also access in other locations. Again, here's performance monitor as well. So if you want real-time access of what's going on with the system right now, those would be the ways to get there. And then this is a new item right here that I really like quite a lot, the reliability monitor. Here you can kind of just get a chart view or a graph of what's going on with the reliability of this system. So notice that overall it was, a little bit over 5, maybe that's probably about a 6, I guess, if you want to call it that. And then here I had a failing of some kind. There was an application failure, and we can see that that reduced the overall reliability of it. And so it, brought it down a tick here and gave us a, big red X there. Once I select on that, I can go down to the application failures and see what application it was that was failing, and apparently it was my recording software that stopped that day. So we had some problems there. Also, you can see where you might have some warnings. It might not be that something completely crashed or something like that, but it might be, a software installation that did not go well. For example, let's see, software uninstalls is what that one says. And you can just read right across what these different ones are. And it was the Windows support tools. I'm going to mention that a little bit later on, but it's kind of weird because on the exam objectives for Windows Server 2008, it mentions some support tools that are not included nor are designed for Windows 2008 and that are in fact supposed to be incompatible. So I had to install them anyway using old Windows support tools, and we saw that actually was a failed installation. Anyway, so you get the idea there, and it gives you the date, of course, as well, so you can see what's been going on as time goes by. So now the reliability monitor, great way to look for trends and see if your system overall starts to decline in its reliability. Now here we have data collector sets. I like these quite a lot too. Although these can be extremely elaborate, there's almost infinite combinations for what you can do with these. Now I'm not going to actually create anything elaborate here, because when you create a new data collector set, you can use some predefined templates that are already there and they're already pretty much built for you. And that's normally what I build off of, so I'm not even going to name this one. But if I just click on next, we can see that there's some Active Directory diagnostics, or basic performance items, system diagnostics, and so forth. And then we can just keep clicking on next, and it gives you a description off to the side of the kinds of things that it's looking to monitor. And then it has a location where the data is going to be saved, and then you can run it as the default account, or you can change that to a specific account if you want to. Nothing too elaborate there either. And then you simply click on finish, and that's really all there is to that. But you could also be very granular and specific there if you wanted to. But I really like the ones that are already included under System. For example, we're discussing the 70-642 exam, which is an Active Directory related exam, so I think that Active Directory diagnostics are going to definitely be relevant there. Here we have a couple of trace counters and a performance counter and a configuration item here as well, and all of these things combined will combine to create the Active Directory diagnostics, and it's going to monitor all of those things for a period of time. So what I wanted to do here is I could right click on this and then choose Start, and that would then start to log all of this information, and then in order to view that information, I would then go to the reports to see what happened. Alright then, and offline here, I went ahead and right-clicked here and chose Start, and now we're going to collect a little bit of data. I'm going to do a few things on the network here, log on a count or two, and then we'll return and see what we've got. Alright then, I went ahead and stopped this by right-clicking and choosing Stop. And then what I could do is go to Latest Report, or if you want to just browse for it, you can go down here into Reports, and then there's System, and then here was the Active Directory Diagnostics. These pretty well directly reflect what I've had in my data collector sets up here. So I'll go to Active Directory Diagnostics. It was recorded by a specific date. If I had created two reports on the same day, the second one would be appended with a 0002. Then here we can just see the performance overview, and we can see how much CPU, network, disk, and memory was utilized. And if any of these are a little bit on the high side, according to Microsoft, it would give me a yellow light here or a red light. And then since we're talking about Active Directory in particular, let's expand Active Directory out here. And we see a lot of different things relating to Active Directory. We didn't have a lot going on, so there's not a whole lot alarming here. But I could go down here, for example, to the Kerberos Key Distribution Center. Remember, this is a main function of a domain controller because Kerberos authentication takes place by key distribution. And we see that I had indeed my Vista Client computer account did log on. And we should have there's a user account right here that also logged on. And so we see, the response time was very, very brief and wasn't too bad at all. Now, the other things you might want to see is you might want to identify, and this is very important, I would say, in terms of exam objectives, You might want to be able to use these kinds of diagnostics to identify which user or computer is receiving a whole lot of logon requests or Kerberos activity or Active Directory activity. And here it'll show you, for example, clients with the most CPU usage. Well, that would be this account. Apparently, that was maybe accessing a file share at the same time as well, or something like that. But the overall idea is you want to see which one was the top requests, and this is a good way to do that. Now let's also talk here about Event Viewer. Now you may have been working with Windows for the past few years, and you say, James, I've been to the Event Viewer, nothing fun there whatsoever. Well, that's probably still true, because the Event Viewer can be quite tedious to go through. But the good news here is, at least it's easier to find exactly what you need and what will be relevant to you. For example, here I'm going to go to Event Administrative Tools, and again, instead of going to Server Manager, I'm just going to go right to Event Viewer in this case to make it a little bit less cluttered. And we'll see some differences in the way things look now. So for example, in the Event Viewer, notice that we don't just have the common Windows logs like we used to have here. Application, security, setup, and system. Now, on domain controllers in previous operating systems, you would have also seen probably DNS and Active Directory related logs and stuff like that. But here we just can't have that for the time being because we have more specific logs under Applications and Services logs later on to look at. But you can also see custom views. Now there's one that's already built by default, but you can also create your own if you want. The one that's there by default is Administrative Events, and boy is that ever handy. Because again, I don't want to have to click through every one of these things and go on a bug hunt for little red exclamation points and warning signs. Here I just want to see the important stuff right now. What's my problems? And in this one, for example, this was pretty easy. The session set up from the computer, and this is a computer off to my left that I had started up a few minutes ago, failed to authenticate. And the reason for that is because it lost its security association. It's kind of an old computer. I haven't booted it up on the network in over 30 days. So I had to rejoin it to the domain in order to get it going. And I've got it going on right now. In fact, that's what this remote desktop connection is. And I renamed that computer to a different account as well for other purposes. Then you can also see different warnings and so forth that go on there that just might be of interest to you. On the other hand, if you want to create your own custom log, I'm not going to go and do a lot of elaborate items with this because, again, it's kind of limitless possibilities here. You just do whatever suits you. But you can say, I want to know about critical error and warning, and I want to know anytime they happen or in the last 24 hours, let's say. And I want to see what kind of logs that I want to check. I want to see only the application, system, and let's say security. Okay, those are the only ones I want to know about. Notice that we also have a whole bunch of other stuff that we could also look at in here, and we'll come to some of those other logs as well after a little bit. And then we can also say event IDs. If you're looking for a specific event ID that's been giving you problems, maybe an application throws a certain event ID that you know about, well, you can type that in here. And you can look at certain keywords as well. You can just go to keywords that already appear in this list, or you can enter in additional users or computers that might have been causing a problem. Another thing that's kind of cool about this, look at this tab, XML. If you're pretty adept at working with XML, look, what this does is it's actually building a query for me right here. So whenever I check these items off, it actually creates this. And if I want to edit this manually, I can do that as well. And I'm not going to do that right now. But you can actually go in there and custom enter in your own data there, your own search parameters for that XML data. So you can be extremely granular with all of this. Now I just click OK, and I'll just, for lack of a better idea, I'll just call this, James Emergencies. Because those look like important things right there. All right, and you can enter in a description, of course, if you want as well. You can put a new folder in, which will give you a different folder underneath custom views. I'm okay with just putting it where it is, so I'll just leave it right there. And then we see, a few different things that popped up, and this should give us no information, but only errors and warnings. Wow, looks like I got a lot of errors and warnings here, doesn't it? But that's just a great idea there in being able to whittle down the information to just what you need. Then let's also take a look down here at the Applications and Services logs. Now let's take a look at some related to Active Directory. Of course, the directory service item might be of some interest to us. Here it tells us that in the garbage collection phase, the online defragmentation has completed a full pass on our ntds.dit file. So, good information. Now I know that that happened today. Remember, as I said in a previous nugget, that garbage collection phase and online defragmentation does take place periodically. We can also see things related to key management service. You know, if people were exchanging Kerberos keys back and forth on the network, we could see if there was anything relating to that going on. Here, this is pretty cool. Underneath the Microsoft item, look at how expansive this gets. Wow. You can look at all kinds of data under here. You can see, information relating to the backup. And by the way, on the first level, it doesn't really actually ever show you much of anything. Really, what you want to see is the operational event log. And this will tell you if the backup was successful, if it failed, if it couldn't find the media that it was trying to write to. That's just for backup. But you got a whole bunch of other stuff here as well. For certificates, for, again, Active Directory related items. So really cool in being able to identify specific kinds of events related to a specific type of service. Now let me collapse a few things up here and kind of make this a little bit neater and show you one other thing that you might have caught your eye here a little while ago, and that was these forwarded events. What in the world is that? Well, in the past, yes, we could look at events from other computers by right-clicking up here and connect to another computer, and then you can also, build your own custom console for that and everything. But the problem with that is it's not centralized. You still have to click through them all. Here, what I can do is I can have another system. It could be a Vista machine or a 2008 machine. Everything I'm about to show you works for both. And I can have another computer forward its events to me right here, and I can then collect them all right here every day. What I'm going to do is I'm going to forward the events from DC Nugget 02 down here, which is this computer right here. I'm going to forward those events to this computer. And in order to work with that, we have to first of all define a few terms. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's get a couple of terms and things out of the way for event forwarding. And first of all, you'll have a forwarder and a collector. This just relates to which computer is sending events to the other computer. Here, if I have a forwarding computer, or a forwarder, as it may also be called, I'll also have a collector. Okay. Here's where I'm generating events, and I want to send them to the collecting computer. The collecting computer will then, in its event viewer, see the forwarded events, and that's where we'll see all this information. So if I had events in that right now, that would make me the collecting computer. What we're going to be doing is we're going to work with this computer down here as the forwarding computer. That's DC Nugget 02. All right, so that's what you have in terms of the terms that you have there. You can also send these events over an HTTP connection. In fact, these are the two choices you have, HTTP or HTTPS. Now, your eye might go directly to HTTPS and say, James, that's secure. I would only want to send events over a secure connection. Well, that's a good idea, and we generally want to do that. But it's really kind of cool here because what happens is, if you're in a work group environment, if these two computers are in a work group, then the Microsoft Negotiate Security Support Provider will perform encryption anyway, even if you're using HTTP. If you're in a domain environment, then it will use Kerberos SSP over HTTP. So either way, it's still going to be pretty well encrypted. But if you want to, and if you want to have double encryption, you can send all of that encrypted data over an HTTPS encrypted connection as well, and that's just up to you. But I'll show you where that would be configured. And then it will also automatically open up the appropriate ports on the firewall. In some weird situation, you may have to go back and manually open them up. But if you follow Microsoft's kind of built-in methods here, it should appropriately open up the proper firewall ports. And there are a couple of services that you're going to have running. On the forwarder, right here, you're going to have the Windows Event Collector service and the Windows Remote Management service, and on the collector, you're going to have the Windows Event Collector service. So just keep in mind that you'll have to have those things going on. Now here I've switched over to the services, and I want to point out that, remember, I do have to have the Windows Event Collector service running on the collecting computer. So I'll go ahead and start that, and then I'm also going to change the properties of this to a delayed start. That's only going to give us a performance improvement on the startup. So it's just going to be a little bit more graceful on the startup. And then on the forwarding computer, which is DC Nugget 02 in this case, I want to do the same thing. I want to go to the Windows Event Collector service. Now right-click there, go to Properties. Once again, automatic delayed start, and I'll also start this and click OK. And then I also want to go to the Windows Remote Management service. And there it is. And I'm going to run that the same exact way. Okay, so again, automatic delayed start, and it's already running, so we're good on that one. Now here on the forwarding computer, I also need to run something from the command line. I'm going to right-click on the command prompt to run this as an administrator because it does have to be run that way. And then what I want to do is to run something called the WinRM command. And what this is going to do is it's Windows Remote Management Quick Config, so it's just going to be WinRM Quick Config. And this is just a way to be able to quickly set up the firewall and the listening ports so that it can send and receive, as necessary, the appropriate data for all of this. So I'm going to say yes to make these changes and to make the firewall exception. And this is what I was telling you earlier when I talked about the firewall, saying that if you use Microsoft's kind of built-in commands here, it'll automatically open up the firewall for you. Now, another thing I'll need to do here is to go to our local users and groups, and again, I'm on the forwarding computer here, and I'm going to look for a specific group. This is going to be called the Event Log Readers group. Okay, and the event log reader is going to have to be have its membership going to have to be the collecting computer. So in other words, it's going to have to be DC Nugget 1. I'll have to be a member of the event log readers. So I'll simply double click on that item, click Add, and I'm going to be stymied if I click the name of the computer in here and type it in because it's not looking for computer accounts. So go to Object Types, select Computers, and DC Nugget 1, and there it is. Okay. I could have also done the same thing by going to a command line and typed in something like, let's see, what would be net local group. And I'm only showing you this from the command line in case you need to script this or do a batch or something like that. Oops, pressed enter too soon. Sorry about that, folks. And then event log readers, since there are spaces in it, I have to enclose it in quotes. And then whatever the name of the collector computer is, which is DC Nugget 1, and then add. Okay, and I could have done that as well. So either using the UI like you saw me do, or I could have used this. Both methods would have worked equally well. Now here I've gone back over to my collecting computer, and I've already run the service the way it needs to be, but just in case you want to do it from a command line, you go WECUtil, that's the Windows Event Collector Utility, and then QC to Quick Config, and this would also then change the startup mode to delayed start for that Windows Event Collector service, and we can see that we've done it this way here as well. So make sure that that's been done, and then what we need to do is to go back down here. Now, look, here we have forwarded events, but look, how do I create these? I right-click and, which one of these things do you do? None of them. What you do is you go to subscriptions. You have to have a subscription first. Once you have a subscription, it will forward events into the forwarded events item. So I'd right-click here, and then I would choose Create Subscription. And then I would just name it appropriately. I'll just call this DC Nugget 2 Forwards. Okay, something like that. Okay, and you can enter a description, of course, as you like as well. And then for the destination log, I always put mine in the forwarded events right here, because if you put it in one of these other ones, then it'll just get mixed up with all of the other events that are being collected from the local computer. So I always try to leave them. Oops, I messed it up there. Leave them in the forwarded events there, and then I'm going to select the computers. So I'll click on there, and I'll choose Add Domain Computers. And again, it's going to be DC Nugget 02, DC Nugget 02. I'll check the name. Yeah, I typed it in. Okay, there we go. And you can also, this is kind of handy, you can test it to see if everything is set up so far up to this point so that you can see whether it's working. If not, you have to, tear it down and start over again. But here we can at least test it so that we don't go any further and create an exercise in futility. We just want to see if it works. Good. Connectivity test succeeded. So that also tells me then that my firewall is properly opened. Now, this is the way I did it. You saw how I did that manually. I could also choose source computer initiated. And if that's the case, you have to configure that through a group policy object. Then I want to see the different kinds of events I want to collect. I want to look for critical, error, warning, that sort of thing. And this is basically the same type of thing that I just showed you a moment ago. Let's just do it this time for applications. Maybe we have an application over there that's giving us fits and we want to kind of keep track of it. So otherwise, it's the same kind of stuff that I showed you a little earlier. And then down here, let's take a look at this advanced item. Again, I don't think you'll have to memorize this for the exam particularly either, but very useful information. The selected account must have read access to the source logs, okay, the machine account, Or you can specify a given user. Why would we choose one over the other? If you're in a domain environment, normally you're going to just leave this at the machine account because it's already had the computer account added to the appropriate security group, so it's got the privilege. You can also choose specific user. You're more likely to do that if you're in a work group environment. Then, for our event delivery optimization, we have a few different choices. Normal would send 5 events at a time unless 15 minutes passes, and then it will send everything that it has. And it doesn't really have any respect to bandwidth or conserving bandwidth. If I minimize bandwidth, though, it will minimize the bandwidth, and it will forward by pushes every 6 hours. Okay, this one's going to be a pull, this one's going to be a push, and it takes place every 6 hours. This minimized latency is also going to be a push delivery, and it's going to have a batch timeout of approximately 30 seconds. So it's going to be kind of quick, and it's going to be on a push. I'll just leave this for the time being on, I think, on normal. And then also, I mentioned here that you could use HTTPS. Very easy to do. Simply select HTTPS. It should change the port automatically to 448.3. And then that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave it at HTTP, and that's pretty much all we need to do there. We now have a subscription here. This is sometimes also called just an event log subscription. So if you see forwarded events, event log subscriptions, that type of thing, this whole concept is what they're talking about. Now over here on DC Nugget 2, which again is my forwarding computer, I've created a shortcut here to something called BADApp32. This is again an old Windows 95 utility that all it does is when you run it, it just crashes on you. Okay, it does this on purpose. The reason why I'm doing this, of course, is to generate an error that will appear in the event log, and then it will be forwarded over to my other computer, my collecting computer. I'm just going to close the program. I'm not going to check for a solution. Okay, that's an application Microsoft created to crash deliberately, so there's no need to check into it. And then what we'll do is I'm just going to go to Server Manager here and quickly double check to see that it does appear. So if I go under Diagnostics, then we should see in the event log on this local computer that specific event, and that's the one we want to see forwarded to the collector. So I expand that out, and I go to the Event Viewer, Windows Logs, Application Event Logs, and we should see an error pretty close to the top, I think, over here. So I'll give that a moment to percolate and reappear. Wow, that took its own sweet little time. But anyway, there it is. You can see that BADApp32 did indeed fail on us, and that was the name of that application. So what I want to see is, once I minimize this, I want to see over here in my forwarded events that I immediately have that event, but it's not there. What do I have to do? Refresh the screen? What do I do? Well, you're not going to get this for a while because these forwarded events are not normally urgent. You can kind of put the hurry up on it if you want to, but if I just wait a while, like 6 hours or something, then it will eventually get over here. Or actually, it'll be 15 minutes since I chose the normal option. Alright, now what I'm going to do here also is just give you a little bit extra bonus information. Again, this is not probably exam worthy, but if you wanted to hurry up the collection of events, you could type in WEC util, and this is on the collecting computer, SS DC Nugget 2 forward, and that's just the name of this subscription right here. You just type in the name of that subscription. /CM:/custom. You see, remember we had those 3 options. There was, what was it? Normal, minimize bandwidth, and minimize latency. There was also a custom option there. I don't know if you saw it, but it was grayed out. I couldn't do anything with it. The only way to configure it is through the WEC util command that I'm showing you right here. So now if I were to go back into this item, and I go to its properties, and I go back to advanced, notice that it is now hard-coded onto custom. That's because of what I just did at the command prompt here. Okay? All right. The next thing I need to do is to specify the interval. So I'll do a WEC util, and then SS, and then the name of the forwarder again. And then I would enter it in like you see there. And then I push in a /high 6000. And what that's going to do is it's going to specify how many milliseconds to wait before sending the event. So that'd be 6,000 milliseconds. So that's a minute, right? Yeah. So we'll press enter here, and that's pretty much it. So now what I can do is now I'd only have to wait about a minute, hopefully at least, before forwarded events, and there it shows up right now. So I must have hit that right at the proper time, apparently. And now I have a forwarded event that came over to me here from another computer. Wow, that is just really slick. And to make this even cooler, if that's a word, if I have multiple systems forwarding events to the same forwarded events container right here, and if I want to sort them, guess what? You can filter them as well, and this is going to work pretty much just exactly like you would expect it to, but I could just enter in computers here, and I could create my own custom filters, and you can save those, and then you can just filter to your heart's content to look at only the data that you want. Now here I've gone to the command prompt again to show you a troubleshooting item. Here I'd type in winrm id-remote and then the fully qualified domain name of the forwarding computer. And I'm typing all this in on the collecting computer, and this is just going to confirm that I'm able to successfully communicate with that system. By the way, I use a fully qualified domain name here because that will trigger Kerberos authentication to make sure that I have a secure connection there. But I'll press enter, and the basic idea here is I just don't want to see any errors. This tells me that everything is fine. Okay. What I want to do now on the forwarding computer is type winrm space enumerate space winrm, and this looks wrong because it looks like, wow, you need a space there after winrm and after config, don't you, James? But I don't. You just bunch that all up together, and then you press enter, and then you should get something like this that says that it's listening, and you should not see any errors on that. And so that's just, again, kind of troubleshooting methods that you can use to make sure that you're getting proper communication going on. The Windows System Resource Manager. This is a utility that was not included with Windows Server 2003, but you could download it from Microsoft and apply it to a 2003 system. And it's largely the same tool that we now have included with Windows Server 2008. And although it's in the original bits with 2008, you still do have to add it as a feature. So simply go to Features, click Add Features, and you've seen me do that kind of thing many times. And then you'll just select the checkbox for the Windows System Resource Manager. Now you would think that since you add it as a feature here, that of course you would find it underneath the features here. After all, you can see it right there in the middle, right? So if I expand features, what do I see? Group Policy Management. You don't really get it there at all. What you have to do is, even though you add it as a feature, it will appear under Diagnostics, and here it is, Windows System Resource Manager. Once you select this item, if you haven't, it should default to asking you or prompting you immediately to connect to a computer. I'd already been here earlier and just canceled it, so it didn't prompt me here. But if you need to, you can simply go over here and choose Connect to a Computer, and normally you're going to start with this computer. Now, as a quick side note, you can, of course, connect to other computers, and you can have actually one central computer kind of collecting the resource utilization or managing the resources on a number of other computers. This might be useful, for example, in something like a web farm where you have busy applications that are serving people. Well, if that's the case, you'll probably want to give yourself a dedicated Windows System Resource Manager machine because it also consumes resources to collect all of that information. So just as a note to keep in mind. Now, once I get this computer, I'm going to click on Connect, and then I'm going to actually get rid of all the stuff on the right because we can access all of those things through other means, and it takes up quite a lot of screen real estate, so I'll close that up. The Windows System Resource Manager is a great way to make sure that your applications have the resources they need to be able to run effectively. Let's take a look at some things relating to Windows System Resource Manager, which is kind of a mouthful. We usually just refer to it as the WSRM. So I'll just kind of pencil that in here, WSRM. Do I have it right? Yeah, WSRM. And what it's designed to do is to preserve resources for your given applications. You can preserve resources for CPU, or memory, or both, but Microsoft generally recommends that you do it for CPU, and that's kind of your main focus. You could also do it for memory, of course, but that's kind of a floating number sometimes, the number of megabytes that an application uses. It might require 100 megabytes to perform one function, but then maybe if you're doing something that's more intensive, maybe it needs more memory for that. Or if you have more users using that service or that process, it might, again, the memory requirements might increase. So it's a little bit of a floating standard there. So we usually stick with CPU among other reasons. But the other thing to keep in mind, though, is that you can assign a dedicated amount of CPU resources to most of your processes. Some of the operating system defaults are kind of locked in, but especially any applications that you install, you can dedicate or guarantee that they'll have at least a certain percentage of CPU utilization. This is really good for something like IIS apps and maybe a web farm or something like that, so that you can make sure that whatever the IIS application is that runs your e-commerce, that drives all the money to your company, man, that one's going to definitely have to have, I don't know, 30% CPU guaranteed. And what would happen there is, if we want 30% guaranteed to our web app, for our e-commerce web application, then if other processes on that web server started to get really busy and started to encroach upon that, well, then what would happen is it would rob from Peter to give to Paul. It would take those other applications that are trying to use, let's say, 80% of the processor, and it would back them down and guarantee that I have 30% for my web app. Then another thing to keep in mind with WSRM is that it doesn't even do its job in terms of dedicating resources to your applications until the CPU utilization reaches at least 70%. That's kind of the magic number. If you start to encroach over 70%, then it will start to rob from Peter to pay Paul, like I told you a moment ago. And a really good application or really good usage for WSRM is for terminal services. Let's say I've got 10 users connected to a terminal server. And 9 of those users are just doing generic things like Word documents or Outlook or something like that. But maybe I've got one user there that's working with a multimedia application, or maybe it's a developer, somebody like that, that has a very high CPU application. Well, they might be using, let's just say, 80% of the CPU resources. That leaves my operating system server itself and running services and my other 9 users kind of having to share the remaining 20%. So that's not really very fair to them, because even though they're using simple applications, even their Word typing and Word applications and stuff might start to run really slow. So what we could do with that is we could use something like WSRM to guarantee that everybody has a certain amount of CPU utilization. So let's take a look here at how we can work with Server Manager. What we do first of all is we go to Features, click Add Features, and then there will be Windows System Resource Manager available there. You would think that since you added it as a feature, it would appear under Features, but we only have Group Policy Management. So what you do is, of course, you go to Diagnostics. And here we would have Windows System Resource Manager. Now normally, there'll be this pane over to the right. I usually get rid of the action pane over there, at least in our interface, because we have limited screen real estate. But once we connect to this, we'll also see that we have a number of different options here. Also, if this is the first time you've connected to Windows System Resource Manager, it should prompt you saying, do you want to connect to like the local computer or a remote computer? I will go ahead and choose to connect to a local computer, like this computer right here, and then connect, and then it would give you this interface. And I had already connected, so we already saw this. Now, as a quick side note, you can set up WSRM in kind of a central location to monitor multiple other servers, and to be able to allocate the resources as necessary on each one of those servers. But if you do that, you probably want to make a WSRM server as a dedicated server for that purpose only, because even the function of allocating those resources could in itself be processor intensive if it's doing it for a number of other servers. So let's take a look at how this is going to work. What we do with this is, you don't really do a whole lot within this directly right now. This is just kind of a summary of the different things that are available to you. What you're normally going to do is, I'm just going to expand things out so you can see a few things, is you're going to create a process matching criteria first. And this is just kind of a Microsoft way of saying your application. So if I have a special application that I want to guarantee always has a certain amount of CPU resources available, for example, then I can set that up here. And also, this is what you're going to do. Normally, you're going to configure the process matching criteria first. In other words, you want to configure which application it is that you're trying to control in terms of its resource allocation. And then you configure the resource allocation that you're interested in. Okay, so let's say, for example, that I have a great deal of concern that my calculator application is not going to run properly if I can't give it enough CPU utilization. Okay, so I want to make sure that this always has enough CPUs. So what I'll do here then is I'll right-click here to choose a new process matching criteria. Notice there's a couple of others here already by default. Residual means I want to guarantee that there's always a certain amount of free CPU utilization, and I'm mostly going to talk about CPU here. But I could say I want to make sure that I always have at least 20% CPU utilization, CPU resources free for any process that might happen to come along. Or I could choose IIS application pool, because that again is a very common use for that type of thing. But I can choose a new process criteria, and I can say I want to make sure that calculator has the resources it needs. So I'm going to select that as my matching criteria, and I'll click on Add. Then what we have here are a number of different things to choose from. We could just include files or command lines, and for this you would just have to type it in, C:\\, Windows, backslash, and then whatever to the path for calc. I think it's System 32 calc, something like that. Another thing you could do with this as well is if you happen to know the path for an application that you've installed that you want to guarantee also has a certain amount of resources, you can wildcard this. I could do program files \, and then if I could do a star here, and then any programs that I've installed would have dedicated resources according to what I specify in the resource allocation. But here I would say, whatever the vendor was, maybe it's Adobe. Maybe it's CS4, which is a version of Photoshop. And then I could do like a star. And that would mean any Adobe Photoshop CS4 process that runs from that directory would have the resources it needs. For my purposes, though, I'm just going to kill that one right there, and I'm going to choose one of these other options. Look, you can do registered service, running process, application, IIS application pool. So, for example, if it was a registered service, I would click on select, and it would show me the services that are available on this machine. And if this is a good representation of it, then I could just, maybe sort alphabetically or something like that and say, whatever that is, that's the service that I need to make sure always has guaranteed resources. I could do running process. Notice that on the taskbar down here, I have the calculator running. So I could choose running processes and then select. And I should be able to see, there it is, calc right there. And there's the path for it. And then I'd click OK there. Okay. So then notice that it automatically puts it in for me up here. So a couple of different ways of going with that. There may also be, and this is a simple application, but there may be more complicated applications that also use shared resources or a shared service or some other kind of a sub-application that could also take place and could also affect other applications. I may want to exclude those files or command lines because I would not want that to inadvertently affect other applications. So in other words, if I allocate a certain amount of resources to whatever this application is going to be, but another application also needs a dependency here, that could become an issue. So you can exclude certain things there as well if you want. And you can designate it according to certain users and groups. Maybe I have a user account, I'll just put trainer in here, that has got to have dedicated resources. So when the trainer account runs the calculator, they are guaranteed to always have a certain amount of resources according to whatever I specify later on over here on the left. And that might be useful for people such as administrators that need to perform important administrative tasks so that when they log on and run whatever our management software is or something like that, they're always guaranteed a certain amount of resources. So that's pretty much it. That's how you configure this type of thing, and that's all we really have to do for that part. Then once we have our application configured here, then what we can do is to say what kind of resources we want it to have by going up here. And then I could say I want to do something like one of these pre-built ones. This would be equal per process. This would mean that each running process will get an equal amount of CPU availability. I can also do it per user so that each user is guaranteed a certain percentage of CPU resources. For example, if I have 5 users attached to the system, and what I could do then is guarantee that each one of them would get at least approximately 20% utilization. I can't say exactly 20% because at least 1% has to be dedicated to the operating system resources itself, but in round figures at least. Now, one of those users who also gets 20% CPU utilization availability, they might be running 10 applications. However, the other users are only running 1 application. It doesn't matter. Regardless, each one of the users would be guaranteed 20% CPU utilization, and that's great for application servers, and it helps to make things fair so that people that are using heavy applications and stuff don't hog all the resources away from other people. Another one that's similar to that is the IIS. Actually, I'm going to skip down to this one. Equal per session item. This is a great one for terminal servers. This would guarantee then that for terminal services sessions, each user is also guaranteed a certain amount of resource. And then the IIS application pool, as I mentioned earlier, you can certainly use this for IIS, and it's a great way to, again, distribute equitably the resources. Now, you can also choose new resource application policy. I'm going to say something like this one. I'll just call it, 20% CPU. So whatever application I configure under processor process matching criteria, like calc that I just did, then I could link that or associate that with this resource application policy, and then calc would have at least 20% CPU availability. So then I'll just click on Add, and I'll look for my process matching criteria. This is just going to pick from this list down here, and notice that calc is in there because, of course, that was the one I just put in. This is, again, shows that the maximum that I can put in there is 99%, because remember, 1% has to be given to the operating system at the very least. And so if I wanted the amount of available CPU resources to be at least 20%, I'd put in 20, just like you see there. Again, you can also configure the amount of memory for the committed memory and the working set. You just enter this in. You might have to do a little bit of research to determine how much memory that application actually needs. But other than that, it's pretty simple. You just click OK, and now we've got it. Oh, you know what else? I realized something else I did here. You can't put any spaces in the policy name. I don't know why you can't. It would seem to be awfully nice if you could. But there can be no spaces in the policy name, so now I'll take those out and click OK. And now we've got 20% CPU. That's linked to or associated with this calculator application. Another thing to take a look at here is if I select on this 20% CPU item, notice that it gives you kind of a summary of what's available. It can guarantee 20% CPU to the calculator, and then the residual, or whatever's remaining, is 80%. Okay, so just kind of, again, gives you a little bit of a summary there. One thing you might want to also see is the conditions item. This one's kind of interesting because you can actually do a lot of hot changes to your hardware nowadays. I could hot add a processor, for example, and if I do, and that's what it says here, if I add a processor, what happens? It can take an action. I can force it to take an action. What if I hot add memory? Well, on servers, of course, we can also do that as well without having to shut down that memory, or rather, shut down that server. So that's another good thing that we can do there. And then for the calendar down here, this is kind of cool. What we could do with this is once we enable it, I'd have to right-click and choose Enable. And then I could go to Calendar Events and choose New Recurring Event or One-Time Event. Maybe the recurring event is whatever my backup utility is that I run at night. Maybe I have third-party backup software. I always want to guarantee that it has at least, I don't know, 10% CPU availability. Well, I could set this up as a new recurring event so that it occurs during my backup window in the evening or at night. So you can do that, and it's just kind of a scheduled item that you can configure there as well. And then the resource monitor that we see here is basically the same thing that we've seen before. You can add or subtract different counters into that. And then the accounting thing we're not using right now, but when you install WSRM, it offers to install a local Windows database for you as well, unless you're using SQL. Then you can point it to your SQL database. And then when I actually reach a threshold where I do need to kick into action this policy here, then it will record that for me in that database, and I can look all that up and filter on it and everything in the accounting portion of this. Now finally, let me clean up with just some miscellaneous monitoring notes here. One of those is on the exam objectives for maintaining the Active Directory environment. It says that you need to know about the Service Performance Advisor. Well, good luck with that, because it doesn't exist. There used to be something like that for 2003, but we really don't have it under 2008, at least named like this. What this really is now is it's kind of all blended together underneath the Windows Reliability and Performance item. So don't knock yourself out trying to meet this exam objective. It's not there. As long as you know about Windows Reliability and Performance, you're going to be okay. The other thing that's kind of weird is this REPLMON tool that's also a named utility that you're supposed to know about for monitoring Active Directory. Thing is, it's not technically compatible with Windows Server 2008. It's not included with Windows Server 2008, and you can't even download it for Windows Server 2008. You can download the Windows Server 2003 edition of the support tools, but when you try to install it in 2008, it gives you a warning that there's known compatibility problems and so on, and so it gives you a little bit of an uncertain feeling when you install it, because you say, wow, well, if I install these support tools, am I going to mess something up? And the support tools probably got dozens of different utilities and things that you can run with it, among which REPLMON is included. Now, in my experience so far, REPLMON still works great under Windows Server 2008. Let's go ahead and take a look at how that works. For that, I'm going to go to a command prompt here, and I'm just going to run REPLMON. Okay, you just type in, what kind of fast there, you type REPLMON and press enter after you've installed the tools. Then you'll be able to get to this. Then you just monitor a server. You have to pick out an Active Directory server of some kind. I'm just going to type in DC Nugget 1. You can do the fully qualified domain name if you want. It doesn't matter. And then you can see the various directory partitions that are available, the configuration naming context, the domain naming context, and so forth, the schema, all that stuff. Then what you can also do is, if you want to identify a specific object within Active Directory, you can do that as well. I can right-click here and say, Show Attribute Metadata for Active Directory Object. And again, I can use my already existing credentials here if I want. And I'll click OK, and then I can enter in a distinguished name for something that interests me. For example, here offline, I just type in the whole thing there of Tucson user 01. Maybe I want to find an attribute of that particular account. So I would just type that in the distinguished name format, and then click OK. And then we see it here now appears. Remember earlier that we had worked on this before, and we restored it so that it now has an incremented version number of at least 100,000. So that's why that big number. Also, what we could do is, and this is a very handy utility, I can do this to check the replication topology. Especially if I've been messing around with my sites and I've been moving servers around and stuff like that, I might want to check that replication topology. Now that'll trigger the KCC, as I've mentioned a little while ago in a previous nugget. Another thing to keep in mind, though, is that I can also synchronize each directory partition with all servers. You got to be careful of this in large environments, because that could result in kind of a replication storm where you've got a lot of network traffic going on to synchronize all of that. And then you have a number of different options here as well for making that happen. But just keep in mind that that could be quite demanding there. And then you can also show domain controllers in the domain, show the replication topology. I don't have any other domain controllers now because I've demoted the other ones. But that would just actually show you, actually I'll show it to you anyway, even though you can't really see much here. It'll show you any servers that you have going on with that. Now, incidentally, why do I show DC Nugget 4 here, even though I've actually demoted it, as I mentioned a moment ago? Because remember, in Active Directory sites and services, even when you demote a server, you still have to manually remove it from Active Directory sites and services, and I just haven't gotten around to that yet. So those are some different things that you can do with this. And then as I right-click here, you can see some other pretty self-explanatory items as well on this, and a really, really good overall tool for working with Active Directory. And then another tool that we could work with here is one called REPADMIN. This is simply a command line method for managing the replication that takes place. And what REPADMIN does, let me just type it in here, REPADMIN. What REPADMIN does is it's a command line only tool that allows you to be very granular with whichever servers you want to synchronize with. I can specify exactly who I want to sync with, and you can, of course, do a /question mark if you want to see some examples and things like this. You can replicate LDS partitions. You can do just about anything you want to with this. One of the things that I'll frequently do with this is if I have an urgent replication that needs to take place, I'll use this one right here, this sync all item. So here we'll just go to the end. I'll just do a REPADMIN /sync all. And then it will just perform any synchronization with its synchronization partners. But the key thing to remember here with REPADMIN is that it is a great command line tool to be very, very specific in your replication, if you like, or you could be as broad as you want and just use sync all. So let's summarize what we learned in this particular nugget for monitoring Active Directory. We took a look, first of all, at Task Manager, which is a great on-the-spot utility for being able to check out system resources in use. And we also took a look at the Resource Monitor, which you can launch from within Task Manager, by the way. And it gives you more detailed information about which real-time processes are currently using given resources. We took a look at Network Monitor as well, which is greatly improved from previous versions. And we looked at the Reliability and Performance Monitor, which again is a great way to identify if you're having troubling trends in terms of your overall server reliability. Also, we took a look at the Event Viewer, which has got a lot of great new features, one of which was event forwarding. And we took a look at the Windows System Resource Manager. Remember, this is a great way to make sure that certain applications are dedicated and guaranteed that they have at least a certain amount of CPU or memory resources. And then we have REPLMON, which, remember, I put a question mark there on that one because it's kind of supposedly incompatible. At least all of the support tools are not all compatible. And then we took a look at REPADMIN, which is a great way to control replication with Active Directory domain controllers. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.